What's the best thing the quiet kid has ever said or done in class? Story 1. During 7th grade, a new kid named Nick joined our school halfway through the year. He took the seat next to me in English class but didn't really talk much. One day, as we were reading poems out loud and sharing our thoughts, one guy shared his poem and every single line began with, "If I were a bird. If I were a bird, I'd make my nest in a tree. If I were a bird, I'd fly to school. If I were a bird." A few students gave some friendly feedback. When it was Nick's turn, the teacher asked for his opinion and he quipped, "If I were a bird, I'd poop on all of you. Word." That earned him a ticket out of the classroom, and to this day, I can't help but laugh when I remember it. Nick and I became pals, and honestly, he was a pretty cool kid. I think he just couldn't resist cracking that joke. That boy Nick has a slick sense of humor. I love how he came up with that punchline. Story 2. A smart, nerdy, and quiet kid sat in the front row of the class. He was the kind who always had the right answers when the teacher called on him. Then one day the teacher called on him, and without waiting for his response, walked away and said, "Correct," before turning back to the chalkboard. The moment the teacher shifted her focus, the quiet kid threw his pencil straight into the ceiling like it was an arrow. The teacher didn't even notice. It was an unexpected fast act of defiance from someone who usually stayed silent. The entire class saw it. When the teacher turned around again, the quiet kid was acting cool, diligently taking notes. The teacher still didn't catch on. Finally, the teacher spun around once more to ask another question, and the entire class struggled to hide their laughter. No one dared to glance at the pencil stuck in the ceiling. And the teacher asked, "What's so funny?" A few students laughed, making the situation even more hilarious, but the teacher remained completely clueless. It was just another boring math class, but that was the funniest moment of the entire year. Story 3. Back when I was in kindergarten, we had this buddy system to help us make friends more easily. Even though I've always been an outgoing kid, I got paired up with the most introverted, quiet kid in class. He didn't say much, but for some reason I liked him, and we ended up playing together quite often. That year, my dad got transferred to a different state, so I had to move as well. I remember very little about this time, except for the Chinese yuan coin I gave my quiet buddy before leaving. Fast forward 7 years to 6th grade. My dad's job is relocating once again, and I was a short, chubby kid who often found himself the target of class bullies. I thought the move might change things for the better, so I was pretty optimistic. But as it turned out, my new school had its own set of bullies, and they were up to the same old tricks. During our open lunch breaks, I tripped while I was walking, accidentally bumping into one of the bullies and causing him to drop his lunch. You can probably guess that they weren't too pleased. They ganged up on me and gave me a rough shove or two. Thankfully, the break ended, and they headed back to class. Little did I know they had a plan to humiliate me in front of everyone. Their scheme involved pouring water on my pants as I entered the classroom and spreading the rumor that I had peed my pants. But just as I was about to face that embarrassing moment, someone stepped in from inside the classroom and took the splash of water intended for me. It turned out this guy had overheard their plan and decided to take action. The guy who got splashed was the same quiet guy from way back in kindergarten. Back then, neither of us knew who the other was. I only realized it when he saw the Chinese yuan coin he had with him, stitched to his backpack. The world truly is a small place. Story 4. I used to be the quiet kid who didn't talk much in class. People also knew me as the one girl who had a knack for drawing. I'm not sure if this would be the best thing I ever did, but I do remember something I am proud of. During my 11th grade English class, we read through Shakespeare's Macbeth, and our project for that module was a creative one that had to incorporate the play's themes. 2 of those themes were inner and outer turmoil and hardship for some reason. We had to present our projects to the class. So my 11th grade self came up with the idea to depict all the characters from Macbeth as troubled souls, each connected to a specific medieval punishment method. For example, I drew Macbeth with the prisoner's collar, a device used to prevent sleep, mirroring his sleepless torment in the play. Banquo was catched with the heretic's fork, a tool to silence someone, just like how Banquo was silenced in the story, and so on. I ended up with an A+ in that project, but the way I presented it to the class definitely got me some curious looks. Whoops. Whoa, that's dark. I bet her classmates were like, "What's going on in this girl's head?" Story 5. It was right before winter break. Just as the bell was about to ring to end class, our teacher said, "Oh, I forgot. You have assignments to do over break." Everyone groaned, and even the quiet kid in the corner mumbled, "What a dirtbag." Well, the teacher overheard it and asked, "What did you say?" Looking at the kid. To his credit, he raised his head and loudly declared, "What a dirt bag." We all started cracking up, and the teacher's face turned as red as a tomato. I caught up with the kid after the break, and his explanation was, the teacher had already heard it anyway, so I wasn't going to get away with it. Since he asked, I answered. And I also remember my time in junior high in this small hick town in Texas while I was on probation. That's a long story. There was a quiet kid who was surprisingly popular and not bullied like most quiet kids. I had only been going to the school for about a month when this happened. We had a substitute teacher for one of her classes. She was taking roll calls and reached his name. "Piojos," she remarked. "That's an interesting and unique name. What does it mean?" He replied, "Lice." The classroom fell into dead silence and everyone was confused. This kid had attended the school since kindergarten. It's a small town, and he had always been known as Piojos, which was his nickname. Nobody had a clue what it meant, let alone that it wasn't his real name. All his school paperwork had to be updated and everything. I thought it was hilarious. Story 6. A petite, blonde girl with a really high-pitched voice shared a poem she wrote about death being inevitable and how everyone will eventually meet their end. Then the somewhat quiet and somewhat creepy kid in my poetry class presented a rather unconventional one about visual excitement. In fact, it was surprisingly artistic, employing metaphors to describe how it opens the gateway to one's inner self, providing a direct view inside. Here it is. It looked directly at the parts becoming whole. It moved so swiftly into me, shattering the closed window to my soul, out of which I never more would see. It mattered not. It filled my mind. With millions of homunculi, for from seeing I'd never felt this kind of joy inside my rightmost eye. Story 7. I remember a time when a quiet kid really made me crack up. It happened during a class with a teacher who used to give a quick countdown before moving on to the next topic, saying, "Everyone understand? Going once, going twice, 3 times? Okay." Well, the teacher shortened it to once, twice, 3 times, and the quiet kid chimed in with a lady in a somewhat melodic tone. It was really funny, man. On another occasion, our professor was discussing the personalities of different cities, mentioning, "Some cities have a lot of personalities and talk a lot. Some cities whisper, and some cities don't seem to be saying anything at all." That's when this quiet kid, who had never spoken a word before, said, "Topeka." That was it. The kid clearly had some strong feelings about Topeka, Kansas. Then, on another day, there was a pesky fly buzzing around the room. Out of the blue, he threw his pencil straight up and impaled the fly, lodging the pencil into the ceiling. Those ceiling tiles were pretty weak, but it was the coolest thing I've ever witnessed. I wish I could go back in time and capture it on video. I can't believe this. Either that kid has a thing for hitting flies or he's secretly training to become an assassin. Did this make you realize that quiet kids sometimes have the loudest stories? If it did, then give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. Story 8. My final year of English class in high school was a close-knit community. We had running jokes and everyone pretty much left behind any cliques or clubs, so at the end of the year, the teacher handed out awards. The quiet kid received the prize for speaking a grand total of 4 words during the entire 2 years we spent there. Not that anyone asked, but my award was, "Too badsy for saying the most unexpected things at the most awkward times to the least suitable people." It was nearly the opposite of Courtney's. It wasn't the one specific joke I made. Instead, it was a series of incidents, some of which involved jokes about unusual topics like socialism and like Beth's romantic adventures with another student's mother. As a follow-up, shortly after that, the quiet kid and I actually dated for a brief period, and she turned out to be incredibly talkative. It was quite surprising because I'd barely exchanged words with her in the 5 years of secondary school. So Courtney, if you're out there, keep on talking, because you're pretty cool. Story 9. In college, my friend Harry was known as the quiet kid, but one day in the middle of a dead silence, he randomly said, "Oh, if I were a turtle." It was as if he believed that turtles were the ultimate life form. Then during the last semester of senior year, we were given a pass-fail essay assignment. Making any grammatical, stylistic, or formatting mistakes meant instant failure. It had become a tradition for seniors to write and flunk this essay, and the teachers would never stop boasting about how impossible it was. But the quiet kid in my class, of all people, wrote a flawless essay. And there was another memorable incident. Scene, biology class. Teacher. Even though clones share the same genetic makeup, they may still come out differently. If we were to clone James here, his clone might have more. Quiet kid. Friends? The teacher didn't even argue and just looked sadly at the kid. It might not have been as extreme as some other stories, but it was still completely unexpected. Story 10. We were in health class discussing domestic issues, and somehow the topic turned to how Britney Spears faced criticism for her treatment of her kids. A kid in the back chimed in, probably because she hit her baby one more time. Everyone, including the teacher, burst into laughter for a good 10 seconds before things settled down. Even the usually quiet guy who made the comment was laughing. I guess it's because he doesn't usually say things like that. On another occasion, we were engaged in a class discussion or game that required us to come up with hypothetical scenarios for some reason. This was back in 2013, when the band One Direction was loved by some and loathed by others. The teacher asked, "Name a place you'd never find One Direction." For a moment, the class fell silent, just as the quiet kid said, "The Grammys." It was almost too perfect, especially because it was obviously intended just for himself. What a legend. Witty. Quiet kids are the coolest. You'd think they were so serious until they cracked up a joke. Story 11. My wife shared a story about an extremely quiet kid in her class. Nobody had ever heard him utter a word due to some mental health condition. The teacher knew not to call on him. And during the last week of school, this kid finally broke his silence. And guess what? He had a 100% British accent, in the middle of the cornfields of the Midwest. Then, in our high school, we had a student who refused to speak even if a teacher tried to get a response from him. It wasn't until the day we graduated that he spoke for the first time. His explanation for 4 years of silence was simply, "Just because I could." Story 12. This quiet kid taught the kid who kept hurting him a lesson. I think it was about the 7th time he said, "Dude, please stop," before things got messy. The next one didn't happen in class, but during our high school's variety show in my senior year, there was this quiet guy who usually sat in the back and didn't socialize much. He played the most epic guitar solo ever. It was incredible. I still remember it 10 years later. There was also a girl who went through all of middle school hardly saying a word unless it was absolutely necessary. Then one day, the class was getting rowdy while the teacher was out of the room, and in the raspiest, deepest voice she yelled, "Shut up!" We all instantly went quiet. Story 13. The dorky, short, pudgy kid was bullied by the popular class jock. The dork decided to stand up for himself, rushing the jock and giving him a good old hockey-style roughing up. Surprisingly, the jock switched schools the next year. It might have been related to the fight, but he certainly wasn't popular anymore. Being a bully only works when everyone is scared of you. If your intended victim turns the tables and fights back, you lose the respect you once had. Then in high school, a student expressed a desire to attend Harvard, and a quiet classmate in the back said, "Harvard? Maybe Stewart's." Stewart's is our local cosmetology school. The whole class lost it. Story 14. I don't teach in school, but I help middle to high school kids learn to umpire baseball games. There was a student who was really quiet and shy. I thought, umpiring might not be right for him. About a week later, I went to check on him during a game. I was surprised to hear him making loud, confident calls. It turned out that being an umpire had boosted his confidence. In a different situation, during a 6th grade science class, the teacher left, and we started messing around with hot plates. One of my classmates hurt his hand in a hot plate and had to go to the nurse. Right after he left, a quiet kid walked in and casually said, "Smells like burnt meat in here," and then sat down as if it was no big deal. Everyone stared at him in amazement. Story 15. Classmates used to toss crumpled paper balls at the quiet girl every day because they knew she wouldn't react. But one day, she surprised everyone by picking up those paper balls, spitting on them, and tossing them back. The teacher just smiled and observed. For context, the teacher was typically strict, often scolding and giving detention to the troublemaking kids, but since they were stubborn, nothing stopped them. So when the quiet girl decided to take action, he simply let her handle the situation her way. Dude, that's an epic payback. Bullies deserve to be put in their proper place. Story 16. When I was a kid, I had a huge obsession with The Simpsons. One day, I couldn't resist narrating everything in the Duffman voice, like, "Duffman says, oh yeah," and so on. Well, it went on for a while, and eventually, the quiet kid sitting next to me had enough. He stood up and yelled, "Shut the hell up! I don't care about what Duffman says!" He got in trouble, and I managed to escape unscathed because the teacher hadn't heard any of my Duffman quotes. I still think about him sometimes. I'm sorry, man. I was being so annoying, and you didn't deserve to get in trouble. Story 17. In my theater class, there was a quiet student who mainly worked backstage. One day, our teacher asked us a question. "What's your favorite Easter candy? Or any candy if you don't celebrate Easter?" One student said chocolate bunnies, and the teacher wanted to know what they liked inside them. Some students said things like peanut butter or marshmallow cream, but then one girl with a very flat voice said, "Organs." On another occasion, our geometry teacher was proudly talking about how good he was at drawing circles. He said he hoped to draw a perfect circle someday and asked what would happen if he did. At that moment, my friend, who is usually quiet, shouted, "You die." I can't remember exactly how the class reacted, but I laughed. The teachers seemed really crushed. Story 18. There was a pudgy girl who was insulting a quiet kid during lunch, calling him a trash can because she thought all his ideas were garbage. In response, he delivered a comeback, saying she must have been a refrigerator because she seems like where all the food goes. It wasn't a crazy moment, but it was a bit of a mad lad comeback. I also remember a quiet kid scribbling some things down in a little black book. Me. "What are you writing?" Him. Blank stare. "I'm adding you to my death list." This was back in the early 90s and we would chat from time to time, so I never took it as anything more than a dry joke. Quiet kids really know how to roast, and I think they have every right to do it. Just beware of that kid with the death note. Story 19. A girl who used to sleep in class went to the director's office because her philosophy lecture was getting too noisy. In the next class, right after she started falling asleep again, the quiet kid woke her up and warned her that he wasn't going to allow her to doze off anymore. For real. And during summer school, the quiet kid was constantly pestered by the loud troublemaker sitting behind him. The bully called the quiet kid a very uncool name, so without missing a beat, the quiet kid swiftly did something to the guy's hand and then calmly turned back around. It all happened so quickly that we weren't entirely sure what took place, except for the other guy's loud screams and the pencil sticking out of his hand. Story 20. In my class, there was this quiet kid who had this daily routine of getting up exactly 5 minutes before the end of the class. You could say you're watched by it. But then one day he did something that left the entire class in shock. He stood up a whopping 20 minutes early. It was like a collective gasp from all of us. When the teacher inquired about this unexpected early departure, he calmly replied, "I need to check my blood sugar a bit earlier today because I'm leaving early to visit Disney." What made it even more surprising was that nobody even knew he was diabetic. He kept that a secret all along. Then, in high school, I became best friends with the quiet kid. He mostly talked with me and he kept it shushed enough that it flew under the radar for other people. Then came the day when the loud girl finally noticed. "Wait, he talks? I haven't heard a peep from him since 6th grade. Without even glancing her way, he leaned in real close and dropped a whisper my way. He says he only talks to interesting people. This moment stuck with me, not just for the ego boost he gave me, but also for the loud girl's comeback, which was, "Well, all right. I hope I don't hear from you for another 4 years. Story 21. I went to Catholic school and the quiet kid was in many of my classes and played soccer with me. He had a subtle sense of humor, but he rarely spoke in class because, like most young dudes, he disliked school, especially the religious stuff. Our religion teacher often teased him, saying, "Keep it down, quiet kid. No need to yell and disrupt the class." Or, "Easy there, quiet kid. You're disturbing my lecture." Only the teacher's pets would chuckle at his jokes. One day, the quiet kid was feeling rather grumpy. The teacher's annoyance pushed him over the edge. The teacher said, "You know what, quiet kid? You never participate or contribute anything to my class lectures and lessons. Do you think you can just coast along and consider yourself part of the group?" In response, the quiet kid delivered a witty blow, saying, "Sounds a lot like your god and his only son you talk so much about." I laughed so hard that I ended up with detention alongside him. As for another quiet kid in our class, he was occasionally targeted by a guy with a cleft chin. One day, the cleft chin guy insulted the quiet kid, who fired back with a retort, "Is your mouth so filthy because someone popped you in the chin?" It was 6th grade, and our whole table, we were seated in groups, burst into laughter. It was a somewhat daring joke, but it was directed at a bully. The quiet kid earned the nickname Chin Popped Kid, which was quite amusing to us 6th graders. Story 22. I'm friends with one of those kids who's so quiet it's like he can turn invisible. People just forget he's there. I was in art class and the stereotypical troublemaker of our grade, let's call her Jane, started complaining about trivial stuff no one cared about, just being a difficult person overall. I had one earbud in and was just tuning her out when the quiet kid suddenly looked up and said, "You know that no one cares about what you're talking about, right? No one's listening to you." The entire class was silent. I've been friends with them ever since. Dude just burned that salty girl to a crisp. She must have felt like a total dimwit, hearing those words from the quiet kid. If you've made it to the end of this video, then I know you'll love the next one. Stay tuned for What Awkward Situation Did the Nice Guy Put You In? Story 3 Gave Me the Creeps. See you there.